the less than $10 million companies deployed 13% more ad dollars than they did last quarter. And they only got a 10% increase in revenue for it.
Hey everyone, I'm Jeff, head of marketing at A2X, award-winning e-commerce accounting automation software for the world's leading Shopify, Amazon, eBay, Etsy, and Walmart sellers, as well as their accounting partners. And speaking of accounting partners, I'm joined today by Sam Hill, who is the founder and CEO of Ecom CFO, as well as the author of the P&L Benchmark Report. Sam, as always, appreciate you joining me and sharing your expertise.
Y'all are the best. Thanks again for having me.
So Sam, you and I are going to be talking about the Q2 2025 P&L Benchmark Report. This is the third time we've done one of these videos. The first one was for 2024 performance. The last one was for Q1. You can find the links in the description below if you want access to those. I'm particularly excited about talking about Q2 because, we have a benefit of having done three. One is that we can look at the trends over the last three P&L benchmark reports. And two, there's been a lot of FUD in the market around tariffs and the impact on P&Ls. And I know that you and I have talked about this. I'm really curious to see if we're starting to feel those impacts in Q2 or if we might be seeing them in upcoming P&L benchmark reports, whether Q3 or beyond. So I'm super excited to dive into this with you. Let's get into the first question, which is around trends. In previous benchmark reports, we've really seen a tale of two cities around larger sellers, typically sellers doing over 50 million and more, and smaller sellers that are doing 10 million and less. And it feels like they're operating two very different businesses. But in this benchmark report, the gap seems to be shrinking. Can you talk a little bit about that, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So in previous reports, we have seen this larger divergence between less than $10 million businesses and greater than 50. And, we've seen the percentage change in net revenue could be 20, 30 percentage points difference. And one thing that really struck me is that if we look at the totality of the cohorts, that disparity is non-existent. So the less than $10 million businesses on average grew 10%, and by grow, I'm specifically referring to net revenue. And the greater than $50 million companies, again, on average across the whole cohort also increased by 10%. Now, and again, we're recording this in late September. So if we put ourselves in the mindset of the average company in Q2, like those are darker times. And those were more uncertain times of what's going to happen with the tariffs. Like, is my business over? We were still in the 150% China tariff land. And I think that it speaks to all companies, regardless of size, really taking pause and making sure that they have a real plan, or pausing just to see what is going to become of these tariffs. And I think a lot of that is reflected in the numbers. And again, it doesn't matter what size you were. And part of the story as well, I know we're going to talk about return on ad spend and ad spend dollars deployed. But what's interesting as well is if we look at the total ad dollars deployed, on average, the less than $10 million companies deployed 13% more ad dollars than they did last quarter. And they only got a 10% increase in revenue for it. The greater than $50 million companies, on average, deployed 50% more ad dollars, but they only got a 10% bump in revenue. Wow. So that's really significant as well. And, shocker, the return on those dollars was actually less. So deploying more dollars, getting less because of it, or getting less as a result of it. And there's a couple other storylines that I know we're going to get into, but that's the revenue overview.
And there were still a few shining lights, right? Like some outliers that had really great performance in Q2,
Yeah,
which
exactly. And sorry to cut you off, but I know where we're going. So most people don't make it past page 4, but what the rest of the report has is not only the aggregated data but also the percentiles. So it's a double click into each of the revenue cohorts that you can see. Okay, how did the 50 percentile perform? How did the 95th percentile perform? And you'll notice that regardless of revenue cohort, the best companies still performed quite well. They're achieving 20, 30% growth quarter over quarter. So it would be more problematic and
concerning.
and more concerning, thank you, if we saw the 95th percentile of companies also only growing 10% or being flat. But the best companies are still growing, period.
Nice. So just to TLDR that, it sounds like the gap between small seller and large seller is starting to shrink, but there are still outliers, right? Top performers continue to perform really well. Wholesale, which was one of the key stories of the previous two benchmark reports, is not coming to fruition as people once thought. And then, another piece, let's just dive into it right now. Ad costs. Everyone, regardless if you are large or small, is experiencing increased ad cost across all platforms. Is that the correct takeaway from the benchmark report?
I think so. And yeah, I have to give our analyst, honestly, a lot of credit because I completely missed this. And one thing that I wasn't doing is looking at Meta and Google and Amazon's earnings and their 10Qs and 10Ks or their annual reports hard enough. And one of our analysts found a really nice slide. Well, nice for Meta, not as nice for e-commerce companies. That it shows the cost per ad month over month, and shocker, it is higher. And all that means for our clients or e-commerce companies is that you should bake in roughly 10% of increase in ad costs over time that you're going to have to overcome as a business owner, period. And that is one of the, I knew that ads go up over time. There's no secret there, but by how much? Of course, this varies dramatically between industry. If you're in beauty or if you're in hard goods or you're in CPG or whatever. But I think in general, going forward for our budgets and forecasts for 2026 and ongoing, you should be baking in a minimum of 10%.
So let me ask you a question here. Is that just a basic price increase from the ad platforms? Is it increased competition, or the scary one, softening consumer market, less buyers, less inventory?
I think it's all three, and we're never really gonna know. But I think this whole first principles phrase to me is still confusing. No one knows what first principles actually means. but if we did and I took a shot at it, understanding basic incentives that Meta and Google are incentivized for their ads to increase over time, and also Meta and Google. I understand that I'm a finance person and marketers will get upset with this statement, but my assumption is it's never been easier to at least create and start an ad campaign. So therefore, there's going to be more people doing it, and therefore that increased competition more than likely drives prices up over time. That's my assumption. Now, will we see the emergence of new platforms and obviously like TikTok and stuff? Like, will we find an equilibrium, or will we find more ad inventory over time to deploy ad dollars? Maybe, probably. And so will we see a lowering of those ad costs? Okay, maybe. But yeah, until then, I'm going to bake in 10% increase year over year.
Totally fair. And from the perspective of a marketer, I think that your finance point of view, probably not wrong. I think the other component is that organic reach and demand is significantly harder to come by, whereas spending money on ad dollars is a little bit easier, which is also probably increasing competition.
Yeah, and not to toot our own horn and A2X's horn, but the other component is still that a lot of founders and companies still don't understand their numbers, but more specifically, what the changes in their margin profiles, et cetera, have an impact on their max CAC. Like, if I'm in a high tariff environment, guess what? Your cost to acquire that customer, the max that you can spend, just went down.
Yep.
But you may still be operating as if it's the old number. So you're okay with continuing to spend ad dollars, or you have some other motive, like keeping your line of credit up. So I'm still going to meet a minimum revenue threshold, et cetera, and that I think creates some perverse incentives for companies to continue to deploy ad dollars when it may not be profitable.
Tons of brands overspending, driving up ad costs. That to me sounds really credible from a finance perspective, just given the amount of financial visibility that most brands have, which is why the P&L Benchmark Report is so valuable and why it's important to keep track of it over time. And speaking of keeping track of it over time, I was really expecting, I mentioned this in the intro, but I was really expecting tariffs to have a major impact on the Q2 P&L Benchmark Report. And I was shocked to see that it didn't. Why? And when can we expect that pressure?
Yeah, I expected to see more of an impact as well. But we really just started seeing the impact in our clients' Q3 financials. I mean, the short answer is that all the inventory that is being sold is generally not subject to tariffs. It's all this new inventory that is either on a boat, on a plane, and just arriving into warehouses. And so the added cost of that inventory is not being baked into the very end of Q2, if not in Q3. And the real answer as well is, I think some of our clients, and we internally as a company, are trying to apply the right methodology to account for the tariffs as well, if we're going to expense them all in 1 month, which is one approach. If we're going to actually apply them to each individual unit, like a true accrual, first in, first out, or weighted average cost. But because there's been so much volatility in, our tariffs on, our tariffs off, are they going to get refunded, et cetera, it's been challenging to do anything other than just book them in the month incurred. And so if something changes within this year, we're able to easily reverse that. I say all that to say, I mean, the takeaway for anyone listening to this is just make sure that you have a very clear understanding, number one, what the tariffs are, because that should be a given, but it's not. And two, how they're being accounted for on your financials and how that's going to impact your ability to budget, forecast, deploy ad dollars, make other decisions within your business.
That is not the takeaway for me at all. The takeaway for me is to subscribe to the Ecom CFO newsletter so that you could see the delayed impact of tariffs in the Q3 P&L Benchmark Report. Unfortunately, I wish that there were no tariff impacts, but it sounds like they're coming. They're just a little bit delayed. Yeah. So stay tuned. This is why, Sam, I'm just going to say thank you for everyone for putting together this report. To your point, there just isn't enough data out there for people to benchmark themselves against. And it's not just about the benchmarking, but also keeping track of trends. So I'm curious to see what's
Absolutely.
going to happen in Q3 and beyond. Cool. So those were the pieces that I wanted to dig into after reading the report. I'm sure that there were other takeaways for you. So I'm going to pass the mic over to you so that you can identify one or two things that you'd like to dive deep into.
You're so gracious in giving me this softball question. The biggest call out, and I wrote about this in our newsletter a couple weeks ago. And the thing that concerns me the most is G&A. Again, going back to page 4, G&A, both G&A absolute dollars and as a percentage of revenue increased dramatically for all companies. Well, the average, I won't say all companies, but I mean, and what this means is we're seeing relatively small revenue improvement. We're seeing contribution margin go down, and we're seeing people spend more in fixed costs. And that to me is one of the most alarming things, because we're not cutting fixed costs soon enough, and we're not cutting them deep enough. And I'm seeing more and more businesses that I talk to that are, they're laying off their full-time CFOs, their full-time finance and accounting teams, and choosing firms like ours. But that's just the finance and accounting department, which is usually a relatively lower percentage of their total fixed costs. So taking a really hard look at fixed marketing cost, usually operations isn't the biggest percentage of fixed cost. But the other story that I'm seeing more and more, and I wrote about this in my newsletter, is rent, and whether or not you're going to do in-house fulfillment going forward or look for a 3PL. Because if my volumes are down and they're not going to, or they're not going to increase as much as I thought they were when I made my decision to take fulfillment in-house, that inflection point is becoming a lot more on the side of I should go to a 3PL versus keeping it in-house. And, interest rates have gone up. And so therefore the mortgages on your landlord's property or if you own the warehouse is going to go up, and they're going to pass that on to you. So it's just, more and more cost. And so I think having, our clients and e-com companies take a really hard look at their fixed costs, and maybe even cut deeper than they feel comfortable with, and being able to live to fight another day. It is much better to stay in the game than it is to, put all of your eggs in the Q4 basket and then have a bad outcome. I think, this is the Jeff Bezos quote of having two-way doors. A lot of times cutting fixed costs is a two-way door. You can always add the cost later, but if you get kicked out of the game and you go bankrupt, or you at least start off a really bad death spiral, then that's not a two-way door. That's a one-way door.
Yeah, 100%.
It's really challenging to come back from that.
Yeah, and I appreciate the hard look on G&A. B, I so empathize with founders and business owners, because a lot of those costs are headcount, which I understand why one would want to punt those types of decisions, or at least delay them for as long as possible. But to your point around, living to fight another day, I think is a huge takeaway. And to talk with your accounting and finance team, right? And at least have a pulse on what you could do tomorrow that wouldn't necessarily have an immediate negative impact on the business. Now, obviously, cutting fixed costs, there are impacts, right? But, you know, you can figure out what the lowest impact but highest margin impact exists. The point is just look at it, right? And be aware and start to make decisions against it.
Yeah, exactly. And it's also more challenging as a smaller business because you just don't have the same amount of contribution margin to work with as you do if you're a larger business, and it's more and more difficult to absorb a hit to your team or cutting personnel. It's just more difficult. It's just the math. So I completely empathize as well. And some of our clients have made some really hard decisions, but again, necessary for in some cases for you to stay in business. And if we continue to make zero EBITDA or negative EBITDA, it's not a business, it's a hobby.
Yep. Yeah, that's 100% right.
And we have to also, look at the cold hard facts sometimes of what our financials telling us and what behavior does that need to drive.
Yeah. So Sam, I really appreciate you taking the time to share your expertise and to dive into the Q2 P&L Benchmark Report. If you want to stay tuned and get access to the Q3 P&L Benchmark Report, please do subscribe to the Ecom CFO newsletter. It's going to be a link in the description below. If you want access to the Q1 2025 P&L Benchmark Report or the 2024 P&L Benchmark Report, those links are also in the description below. And then lastly, we also have an overview video of the P&L Benchmark Report that goes over methodology, key definitions, and more. You could find that link in the description below as well. So thank you so much, Sam, for joining us. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks again, Jeff.